Is Ohio State, have they just gotten to the point now where we were looking at them earlier in the year and we're like, they got all this talent. You brought in all these guys on offense. Will Howard, even the freshman Jeremiah Smith. You look at Carnell Tate. You look at Egbuka. I mean, even G. Scott, who made a play to start out the game yesterday. Are they just finally playing good and they were just better than everybody the whole time? Is that what this is?
I think so. I mean, we talked about this roster from the beginning of the season and how much money they really put on it. And I like the way Ohio State's built. The reason I picked them before the season started, they're the type of team that you don't need Will Howard to play elite to win a national championship. I think your roster is good enough. So say you do have an injury at quarterback, you're still good enough to play with any other team. Sometimes it takes something to happen for a team to figure it out. And I don't think that was on the road at Oregon when they lost by 1, when Dane Lanning threw 12 people on there. I think it was the Michigan game where Ohio, after that game, all the crap that got talked about Ohio State, from the players to the coach to their fan base, that gave them something to manufacture to go play. And guys, you see it from the roster from top to bottom. I mean, this NFL player is running all over the football field. This is the Ohio State team I expected to see the entire year. It's the reason I picked them before the season started and stayed with them when the playoff picture started. So am I surprised the way they beat Oregon that bad? For sure. And the biggest thing about Ohio State, and we talked about it, the biggest weak point was their offensive line. And how you have Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, and not be able to run the ball, I don't know. But they're starting to figure that out. Will Howard is starting to play like the Will Howard we saw from last year, and that makes them the most dangerous team in the country.
Well, to your point, I agree with most of what you said, but for them to have blossomed, David, the way that they have blossomed, I think they've realized who they are. Like, if you look at the games against Tennessee and Oregon, I mean, even Ryan Day said it. We may have to pass to run a little bit on early down. What did they do early in both those games? They got the ball to Jeremiah Smith in space. They got it out quick. What they did against Michigan, it was an emotional game plan. It was an immature and emotional game plan to go out there and say, you know what? Michigan is good at really one thing, and that's physicality, mucking it up, stopping the run, right, and trying to run the ball. So what does Ohio State do against Michigan? They go out there and try and run it in between the B gaps, running right into the only trap that Michigan could set for you. But when they operate like this, it takes a ton of pressure off that offensive line. They were bombing on Oregon before they were running all over Oregon. The run followed the pass. The touchdown to Jeremiah Smith, the touchdown deep to Egbuka. Then all of a sudden, you have to start manipulating the numbers in the box and maybe keeping 2 safeties high, maybe keeping some help back. And that's when Quinshon and Travion start to hit you up front. I mean, Cone, is Ohio State a quote-unquote finesse team offensively in regards of passing to run instead of trying to bulldoze everybody? Which, I mean, if you score a touchdown, it doesn't matter how you get there.
The Buckeyes have finally become the team that we were promised when we talked about this roster all offseason. And what you have to understand, for most of the season, the Buckeyes have been dominating their opponents. I mean, when you have 9 of the 12 regular season games, if you take out Michigan and Oregon and the closer game against Penn State, for the most part, they dominated their opponents. But it was mostly in the second half. What's so different about these 2 college football playoff games is they've jumped out to the early lead. The Buckeyes had Oregon beat before the Peach Bowl was even over. By the time the network switched over from a double overtime game, it was already 7-0. So if you didn't have 2 TVs going, you missed Jeremiah Smith's first touchdown. And that's what's so different about what's going on with the Buckeyes right now. And again, I'll continue to say, just like I said after the Tennessee game, there are too many college football fans across the country who only watch the Michigan game. And that's natural, right? If you're not a fan of that team or that conference, you only watch a team when they're playing in the biggest moment. And that's one of the biggest rivalries in the sport. So too many people only watch that game and they dismiss the Buckeyes as a mediocre average team. I'm just telling you guys, and you guys know it better than anyone being involved with the Iron Bowl rivalry. How many times have you seen Alabama be the best team in the country and either lose or nearly lose to a 6-6 or a 7-5 Auburn team? Because those rivalry games just mean more. Was the game plan for the Buckeyes in that game just completely baffling? Yes, it was. At the same time, Michigan's going to have maybe 3 first-round picks on defense. Like, we have to give them some credit for that game. And I think the way this team has responded, there's two different ways, because that's the worst loss of Ryan Day's coaching career, period. There's multiple ways you can respond to that. You can either fold up and say, maybe I'm not the right guy for this job. Maybe the fan base here does hate me. I can't beat my biggest rival. We can't beat SEC teams. You can fold up, or you can do the exact opposite and respond the way that they have, because right now they look like the best team in college football.
Oh, they're in God mode right now on both sides of the ball, and I
Both
want to get to
sides,
I want to
yes.
get to the Ohio State defense too, because and when we get to Oregon, I want to let everybody know in the chat we appreciate you being here. Hit that subscribe button. Remember, if you donate, it's on topic. It will get read. We're going to get to you guys in 1 second before we move on to any other previews or recaps. But as we move on to Oregon, though, I do want to make this point. You're going to hear everybody and most people in sports media that cover college football, and they're right to a certain extent, say, oh well, losing to Michigan emotionally got this team to come together and do all this and play for each other, and it embarrassed Ryan Day and this, that, and the other. I think what happened, the most advantageous thing that happened because of that loss, and I know Ohio State fans didn't want to lose that game, I think it was schematically. Because when Ohio State didn't play teams that were close to their caliber most of the year, right? That was the knock. It was, well, you played Oregon, who is an elite team, we think, at least we thought they were, and you lost by 1 on the road. Dan Lanning had to have a magic penalty at the end to win the game. Outside of that, they really didn't play anybody that you're like, golly, this is probably a playoff team outside of, Penn State, and they handled them pretty well, but it wasn't a dominant, unbelievably, incredibly dominant game that looked like Ohio State was way better than Ohio State. I think it meant more schematically. I think it showed them like, dude, listen, we can sit up here and we know Quinshon's good. We know Travion's good, but we have to let Will Howard get the ball out in space. Do you notice how little they've run Will Howard compared to when they did it earlier in the year? And I know they really didn't have to. The quick game is what's killing everybody. That's what would scare me the most. Jeremiah Smith took basically a swing pass to the house from 45 out after making 2 guys miss. And then they're hitting you down the field. And G. Scott's getting more involved, right? Didn't see him at all really during the Michigan game. So I think schematically it kind of evened some things out for Ohio State, and they are now playing to their strengths. But Blaine, back to you, Oregon, right? I wasn't, and I tweeted this out during the game, I wasn't shocked that Ohio State was scoring on Oregon.
No.
We saw them score 37 points the first game. What shocked me was for the first quarter and a half, at least, and I know a quarter and 3/4 of another quarter, Oregon was getting suffocated like an anaconda was wrapped around them. And whether it was Cody Simon, whether it was Caleb Downs, whether it was Jack Sawyer, whether it was Tyleek Williams, or one of those other things that Ohio State has running around in that front seven, that was what shocked me the most, because Dylan Gabriel's played 835 college football games.
66 starts.
That's incredible.
It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. Let's tell you how good the Ohio State defense is. And not only their ones, but their twos. Like, I watched their twos come in and start making plays. The depth is just absolutely off the charts. But this is what you get when you have it. Like, when you have Caleb Downs as your leader, and I didn't know why Oregon did this. Their first 3 drives, their third downs, who do they go at? They win at Caleb Downs. If there's a guy I'm not going at on this defense, I promise you, I would rather go at Burke on the outside, who played a lot better in this game. But the big thing Ohio State did was they kept Oregon in front of them, right? You have to take the explosives away from Oregon. You pressured Dylan Gabriel. The only time they had anything, Dylan Gabriel had to create in the backfield. No run game. You had 2 injuries early for Oregon that did not help. And you find yourself in such a hole. You're down 21-0 or 17-0, something like that, to where you can't climb out of it. If you are just one-dimensional against an Ohio State defense, they are going to tear you apart. Jack Sawyer pressing from the outside in, not getting too far ahead of Dylan Gabriel, making crate on the outside and let our playmakers make plays. Like, guys, defense travels every week. And this is what's been crazy about this Ohio State team. Their defense has been there. It's just their run game has it. And when they figure that out, I don't think anybody can stop them. And right now, that's what the sports books are telling you.
Well, Cone, I mean, Evan Stewart was the one who gassed him up deep down the field last time. Yeah. He didn't play in this game. That was a huge and listen, I'm not trying to give Oregon an escape hatch here. They just got their ass beat. Make no mistake. I don't think Evan Stewart's changing that. But when you go back and look at the way that game went with Evan Stewart being such a threat deep, what it allowed Trayshawn Holden to do, who had a good game yesterday overall, underneath was big. What it allowed Tez Johnson to do underneath was big. What it allowed in the run game, right? Because it softened up those safeties. I mean, Caleb Downs was basically playing middle linebacker.
Yeah.
That's basically what he was playing.
Man, he reminds me so much of Jabril Peppers when he's out there on the field. He's just
so
a Swiss Army knife who can do it all. And he wasn't the only one. I mean, when you talk about Cody Simon, we have to talk about Cody Simon's performance in this game.
Yeah.
He was all over the field. And when the Buckeyes got up early, it was almost like they could just live in this dime package. There was a lot of times where I said, I don't even know if they have linebackers on the field. They're getting pressure with their front four, and their defensive backs are coming downhill so much. And that's the benefit of guys like Caleb Downs, who can come in and run fit and really stop anything that Oregon wants to do from a quick pass game and the supplemental run stuff, all the things we talk about with Oregon. So all credit to the Buckeyes, man. That's what pitching a perfect game looks like, and they've done it twice in a row. On the Oregon side, though, when you're the only undefeated team in college football and you're the number 1 overall seed, you can't come out and play that poorly. You just can't come out and have a game like that. And it's only been 12 hours since the loss, and I'm already tired of the excuses on social media. I mean, this idea, and we talk about it in Major League Baseball all the time, if you get a first-round bye, or you more rusty than the team who, very similar to March Madness, has started to get in a groove and you have to play them in the second round. Look, it's football. You got a first-round bye. That means you didn't have to go beat the likes of Tennessee or any of these other teams in the first round. And I don't want to hear any excuses about it. And for the seeding, because everyone wants to talk about the seeding today and how they should have been able to play Boise State or they should have been able to play the SMUs of the world. If your hypothesis is, you know what, we would have made it farther in the tournament had we played easier competition, then to me, you're already unworthy of being the national champion.
Yeah, well, Notre Dame looked fine against Indiana. Right? They didn't play a conference championship game like some of these other teams did, right? It's an excuse. And again, listen, if you'd have lost by 3 and maybe you came out rusty the first couple drives, maybe I could say that had a little bit to do with it. That's not what happened. You were down 34-8 at halftime. Y'all could have played 4 days after y'all's last game, and we could have had this same result. I was literally thinking to myself watching this first half, this looks like Alabama versus Mercer. Like, this looks like one of those cupcake games that we see. I mean, I think Ohio State maybe jumped out bigger on Oregon than they did on Akron. That's how dominant it was. And it looked like Oregon had no chance. Like, you had to have these magical needle-threaded plays. Dylan Gabriel on their touchdown drive before halftime had to scramble out to his left and throw a Willy Wonka Dr. Seuss ball to the sidelines to get it to 4th and 1 just so they could go for it.
Everything looked hard. It all looked hard.
It felt like a 3A school was playing a 6A school.
That's the number 1 overall seed, which should tell you, because there's so much overreaction and so many referendums on the sport based off a couple blowouts early. That should tell you no one knows what's going to happen when you put 22 guys out on a field and play a football game.